In a world
Welcome.
where minimum wage is low, how will three guys talk about it?
Okay, welcome to Capital Consumption Theory, everybody. I'm Eddie Chu, and this is Zach Whitmer and Brian Winters. And today, Zach wanted to talk about minimum wage. So so go ahead, Zach. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, now that I've thoroughly embarrassed both of you guys by being associated with somebody who talks really weird, I would like to talk about minimum wage. So I've always thought about minimum wage in a way where it it makes sense that we should have a minimum wage for certain things. But as soon as I found out about UBI, it was kind of like, why would we have minimum wage? It should be almost zero if we have a UBI that's sizable enough so that people there's a lot of assumptions in here that if you're not in the UBI crowd of having a really large UBI, but a lot of people in the UBI crowd think that there can be a UBI that is large enough to support people without jobs. That's not in the mainstream at all, but it is a position. Anyway, that if you have a large enough UBI that you shouldn't need a minimum wage. And then I listened to somebody who said we should have a minimum wage, and it kind of changed my whole perspective on what the minimum wage is and what it does. And I thought this was really good. And so they argued that when you raise the minimum wage, you actually incentivize companies to invest in themselves to create labor saving opportunities. And we should be doing this because that is growth for us to have as a society, and having a higher minimum wage incentivizes growth. It makes it so that instead of companies doing stock buybacks, they're investing in other stuff to in productivity growth.
Z-
And that makes a lot of sense in a world with a UBI.
Zach, I have to know who this is that you are talking to because that is exactly what I would say. About higher wages driving productivity growth. He's exactly right, and that's somewhat rare. There's not that many people who have realized this, it seems, or who talk about this. So, who who was
I
it?
will look him up. Sorry, give me a second.
Oh,
He
you forgot his name.
but go ahead. Yeah, it just I when I thought of it, I was like, "Oh, this makes so much sense." Like like one of the things I've always thought about a minimum wage is the reality that when you have a higher minimum wage, you're going to have less jobs. It just is the case that you're going to have less jobs. You'll probably have less jobs, or less jobs, not as many less jobs as you think you'll have, because there'll be greater spending by the people who have wage gains, but there still will be some less jobs. And but that can be a good thing if the productivity gains are being harvested by, once again, UBI. It was, oh darn it, wrong name. Nick Hanauer.
Nick Hanauer, yeah, and he's also for UBI, but he's also for minimum wage at the
He's
same
more pro minimum wage, which I don't understand,
time.
but I think he thinks it's more of a political reality. It's easier, like until until a couple of years ago, UBI was a pipe dream that no one thought was realistic at all,
Right.
and minimum wage was probably your easiest way to get money into the hands of the consumer.
Yeah.
But now that UBI is a legitimate option, I think it's superior in every way.
Yeah. So I completely agree with him that higher wages, incentivize companies to invest into productivity growth, um, so that so that they invest in productivity growth so that those higher wages, don't end up sort of destroying their business model. So I think higher wages are very important for all of those reasons to incentivize businesses to make real investments and to drive productivity growth higher. But at the same time, UBI is still much better than minimum wage, because if you have minimum wage laws but you don't have UBI, to the degree that you don't get that much extra spending into the economy, those higher wages will cause companies to do that productivity growth, to do that automation, and you will get unemployment. At a high enough minimum wage, especially if there's no UBI attached and there's not that much spending to support it. Like the companies will do the automation, and as a result, they will not have to hire as much labor, and as a result, people will just be unemployed. Like there will be a high legal wage that companies must make, but to the degree that it's not profitable to hire people at that wage, like there that will drive some unemployment. Whereas UBI drives market demand, and it forces businesses to have to hire more because they have more business coming in the door, and so they have to have more employees to actually support that activity.
And
It's more sustainable way to drive wages up is you want to drive labor demand up, to drive wages up, because if the legal wage goes up but the labor demand does not go up, then you do get that reduction in quantity at the higher price.
and one of the things I like to say is do what you want to do. And that for me is UBI, is when you're trying to get money to people, get
Yeah,
money to people.
yeah,
Don't try and sneak it around by putting it into jobs.
yeah,
Just give it to people. And there can be other programs too that give you more for X or Y, but if your goal is to get money to the most amount of people, give money to the most amount of people. Don't
yeah,
don't sneak it around with these other ways.
yeah. Although I still support minimum wage.
Yeah,
um
me too. Yeah.
that is more important.
So
I think it's it like what I said before, it is the more expedient political reality is UBI is still pretty far away from a reality unless the child tax credit becomes permanent. Um, which will be, that'll be a change that symbolizes UBI. But anyway, Brian, I think you have something you want to say.
So, yeah, I guess I just want to see what we're talking about as far as minimum wage, as far as is there an actual policy proposal, or we're just talking kind of theoretically? So I think minimum wage is good to set an absolute floor, so you know you compete themselves below a certain level. Um, but as far as any particular policy, I don't think anyone's calling on abolishing the minimum wage in the United States. $15 an hour would be good for large parts of the country, but in a lot of middle America, it's pretty cheap to live. $15 an hour is an awful lot. And so it would be really good for them to be on the receiving end. But I think businesses would have a hard time.
I think Bernie
Um,
Sanders was talking about raising the minimum wage, right? But I
yeah.
don't know
Oh,
if
$15 has been
if that
Right, right, right. So I think this is a state issue, is where I generally come down on the minimum wage, is one
yeah.
national policy with a low threshold, but then, higher thresholds in individual states. Let the local states decide what they need.
I think it could be higher and probably the national. I- this is this is going to take real tons of work to say what the minimum wage should be in Alabama, what the minimum wage should be in Idaho, what the minimum wage should be, and it's different based on cities. But from what I've heard, $15 an hour isn't going to happen. Like, I live in a town who is going to. I live in Washington, and we have $15 minimum wage going up over the course of a few years. It's not like they're going to say, "All right, tomorrow $15." It's going to be a general ratcheting up. And we really haven't seen like oh my gosh, mass unemployment. It hasn't happened. I think, if they're going to do minimum wage this year, great. But I'd love to see, if you're going to do minimum wage, please do UBI.
Right.
Just do it. And then do minimum wage. But
I think,
that's
yeah.
the political reality of it is going to be minimum wage is going to come first, and then UBI is going to come. But
The
uh,
economy is in a situation where we're so much starved of demand and so much starved of labor income that the minimum wage, at least at the beginning, at the lower levels, will actually be self-sustaining. They will generate labor demand and end up kind of sustaining themselves, just because they're so low. They've been stagnant for 40 years already. So I think that you would actually see good things happen, if you raise the minimum wage a bit, because consumers would end up with more money, and then they would spend more. So businesses would pay their workers more, but then they would also get more money in the door as revenues, and it would actually work itself out.
So in this sort of post-pandemic economy, we're seeing a lot of fast food restaurants and other places really struggling to meet their labor demands. What do you guys think? What are the odds of like a couple of fast food franchises just kind of going under and
No, they're not going to go under. They're
lack of
complaining, but
jobs?
they're not going to go under. No way. They're not.
they might
They're not.
wait. They might raise wages, but they
Well,
won't go under.
But to the
yeah.
extent that their business model is based on having a supply of low wage labor,
I
that
think they're going to
you're
automate that job. I think they're going to. Well, right now you have the souped up unemployment, benefits going on, and I think that is a huge, definitely, because you lose that if you take a job, and so that's an enormous incentive for people to not take the fast food worker job. So I don't know how that is going to develop, whether that's going to continue, in the next half year or year.
And the
Um,
other thing to remember too is that
right.
there's the other side of the equation is demand. And from what I've read is that fast food places are have a huge demand right now going on, is that they're actually having huge spikes in uh people wanting to buy fast food,
Yeah.
which kind of makes sense when they have a little bit less stability, that
Yeah.
people save money, and they save money by eating cheap. And I can tell you, you can save more money by eating two McChickens every day than you can by making your own food.
Yeah. I think, if it continues this way, that they'll automate that job. They'll put in the self-serve kiosks where you order, at the kiosk, and you pay on your phone, and that works just fine. You don't actually have to have that cashier at our current level of technology, and it's not that much. I live in China, and that is already pretty much the standard, and it's also becoming the standard at supermarkets, and it's becoming the standard at fast food restaurants, McDonald's, KFC, almost all fast food restaurants now. They have pretty much stopped letting order with the cashier. Like, you just have to go to the kiosk, and it works. Everybody just pays on their phone.
Yeah, I had a trip to Iowa last month, and I forget there's a chain. I think it's Sheets that doesn't have any cashiers. You have to order by their kiosks.
Right. So now the smart thing to do is to continue sending that money out, but remove the restriction that says you're not allowed to work if you want to receive the money. So you're allowed to work. You can go out and be productive,
Wait,
earn
what do
even
we
more
call
money.
that?
Yeah.
What would we
What is
call
that
that?
called? Wait, I gotta
Would
think
it be
about
universal?
it. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, just basic though, right?
Yeah. And you're getting some kind of money. Universal basic money. Got it. Nailed it.
Very
Yeah.
good. Okay. Well, on that note, unless you guys have anything else that you want to say about minimum wage, we can.
So, in conclusion, I think we should say, hey, we like the minimum wage. We want the minimum wage. We love the minimum wage. We want UBI more.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. You can
They
you can do
aren't.
both. You can do both. Um,
Yeah.
But when we talk about minimum wage, I mean, really, the minimum wage is zero. And so universal basic income would be a minimum, whatever, 250, $300 a week for everybody.
Yep.
Um,
And to let everybody know, Brian here actually has an organization that he's working on called the American Union, um, with some ideas about how to make some of these things reality, in our country. So next week, we'll have an episode where we talk more about that. So look forward to that.
Sounds good. All right.
You guys,
Any any other final thoughts?